Mexican authorities finding a drug smuggling tunnel crossing underneath the border into Arizona last week. It's the third such discovery in less than a month as President Trump points to the flow of illegal drugs into the U.S. as one of the reasons the country needs a border wall. My next guest oversees a county with the largest span of southern border in the country, reaching around 120 miles. Mark Napier is sheriff of Pima County, Arizona. Sir, I was listening to an interview that you did last week in which you were describing the changes in the types of folks that are coming across the border. If you could explain that to people here.
Well, thank you for having me on, Dana. The drug war has changed a lot over the last 20 years. It used to be large quantities of marijuana coming between the ports of entry, and the drug traffickers had to import hundreds and hundreds of pounds of marijuana. Well, now we see, the fentanyl, the rise in fentanyl, the rise in methamphetamine, and even cocaine, and a great diminishment of the amount of marijuana being trafficked into this country across our southern border. So the drug war has changed, but also the violence associated with human trafficking. Migrants coming across because they have to pay the cartels to come into the corridors into our country. And many of these people are being victimized criminally, sexually in the case of women, and then through the environment. And the environment in southern Arizona during the summer is exceptionally harsh. What pulls on my heartstrings is my deputies recover over 100 bodies a year in the deserts of my county alone. And that is a humanitarian crisis. And those are only the bodies that we find. We have absolutely no idea how many bodies are out there.
You also talked about how the drug problem is not just there on the border, that those are drugs that end up all across the country.
That's a fact. My deputies, it used to be that if we interdicted 2 ounces of methamphetamine or so, that was a pretty big bust. In the last couple of weeks, my deputies have done 3 seizures, one of 15 pounds, one of 14 pounds, and one of 10 pounds. We know that those drugs are not being cooked in Pima County. They're coming up from the southern border, and then they're being distributed all across the country. So if we can stop these things in my backyard, people don't die in other people's front yards across the country. So this is a national emergency, and to suggest that it's not a crisis is to be disingenuous to the point of almost being dishonest with malice.
Now, let me ask you this, because there's this question, right? So would a physical barrier work? I think your position is some physical barriers make sense in a lot of places, but you need other things. I think people who might be against what President Trump wants to do might say, well, just look at this tunnel. We found this today. That's how the drugs are coming in. What would your idea of success look like here as we try to work towards an outcome?
Well, Dana, the problem is that we've gotten so caught up in the semantics of what constitutes a wall, and we've kind of lost our focus. What I want is total operational control over our southern border. In places, that's going to be physical barriers. They're absolutely the right tool in some areas, and they make sense. In other places, they're going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to implement, and we're going to need technology and human resources in those areas. But folks need to remember that even a physical barrier, a wall, whatever you want to call it, if it's not maintained, if it's not enforced, and it's not monitored, is merely an impediment. And we see that efforts to tunnel under, go over, and go through. So we're going to have a blended approach, and I think that's really what the president's talking about.
I'm running out of time here. Sheriff Mark Napier, thank you so much for your common sense viewpoints. We appreciate it, and we'll be right back.
Thank you.
President Trump blasting a New York Times report that the FBI has been investigating whether he is secretly working for Russia, calling purported evidence that he may be compromised a hoax. The White House also slamming a Washington Post report that the president tried to conceal details of his one-on-one talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now, the interpreter who was translating between the two leaders may be forced to testify before a congressional panel. Can that actually happen? Let's bring in former Justice Department prosecutor James Trusty. Let me start with the New York Times story over the weekend that said that the FBI was both looking into President Trump from a counterintelligence perspective and a criminal perspective. So these two investigations were converging at a time right around when James Comey was fired. How did you take this story?
I took a lot of it as being recycled, frankly. It didn't seem like there was a whole lot that was new. There are selected quotes from Lisa Page, one of the people that has been really greatly tarnished publicly by her involvement in the probe, and some from James Baker, who's the general counsel for the FBI. But the bottom line is, if they started a probe essentially because James Comey was fired, that's not a particularly compelling reason. And it certainly has a whiff of that in terms of the McCabe's of this story, possibly retaliating against the president out of loyalty to Comey.
How frustrated, if you hear from any of your former colleagues at the FBI, how frustrated are they that this story keeps coming up and it tarnishes the reputation of the FBI?
Well, I do hear from the FBI a lot. I hear from a lot of my friends that are agents, and they really view it as a political class acting up and now being exposed. It's Comey, McCabe, Strzok, Page. It's people that were really putting their own politics and their own kind of self-righteousness above the job of being a very important law enforcement officer. So there's a lot of frustration that they feel that the entire department has been tarnished to some degree. And I think there's still some very significant unanswered questions about FISA abuse and about how the probe got started, the use of the Steele dossier. So there's a lot of things that are going to stay in our frontal lobe for a while when it comes to assessing what the FBI did in relation to these two very important public integrity probes.
So now on to the other story that broke this weekend. So the Washington Post says that the president went to great lengths to make sure that his conversation with Putin, that there was no record of it, that it didn't leak. Listen to Kellyanne Conway, who talked about this earlier today.
That was a time when there were tremendous leaks, including from when the president would have meetings in the Oval Office. And I can recall early on 2 calls with foreign leaders, I believe Mexico and Australia, that leaked, the contents of which leaked almost immediately. So there was great suspicion that some people were obviously leaking this.
So now you have Democrats in Congress saying that they're going to try to force the interpreter to come and testify in front of Congress. Is that possible, allowed under the law?
Well, it's possible. It kind of cracks me up to think of that poor interpreter going, I signed up for what? I don't think they're relishing the thought of being thrust into the spotlight that way. There's certainly a chance of claiming executive privilege, but the problem is it's not really internal deliberations, it's a meeting. And there is even some language that the president has used to suggest possibly that he's waived that privilege by saying it's an open thing, I don't care, let it all come out. So there's some arguments that could be made legally. I think the bigger concern is really not a legal one, it's a practical one. And if you strip away who the parties are here, just think about it on an institutional level. Do we want our presidents to be able to talk one-on-one from time to time without everyone being turned into a listening post at their expense? So I think our allies, as well as the Putins of the world, would be very concerned to know that anybody that's remotely in the room can suddenly be hauled out publicly in front of Congress to talk about the conversation.
And one quick word from you. The president's nominee to run the Justice Department will testify tomorrow. What's the number one thing that prosecutors look for when they're listening to somebody like Bill Barr, who they know from the past?
Well, I think they want an independent, strong voice. They want somebody who is going to be very cognizant of the important role of DOJ in our society, one that has a real independent streak from the executive branch and from the legislative branch. So I think they want to hear a little bit of vitality to his testimony.
All right, well, that testimony is tomorrow, so we'll be watching that. We'll check back in with you this week. Thanks, James Trusty.
All right, see you, Dan.
So he is one of the American citizens held hostage in Iran. Now his wife is speaking out about her husband's ordeal in one of Tehran's most notorious prisons. The House Minority Leader set to meet with Congressman Steve King over his controversial comments. What kind of action could they take?
That language has no place in America. That is not the America I know, and it's most definitely not the party of Lincoln.
The fallout continues over racially charged comments Iowa GOP Congressman Steve King made to the New York Times. Now the Republicans' future could be in jeopardy after House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy pledged to take action. Senior Capitol Hill producer Chad Pergram is live on Capitol Hill with more. Chad.
Well, we're expecting a meeting later today between Kevin McCarthy and Steve King. This is the first time that Kevin McCarthy has formally tried to talk to King about this. And in the past half hour, we've gotten a statement here from Bobby Rush, Democratic congressman from Illinois, who wants to censure Congressman King. I'm going to read part of the statement here. My resolution to censure Representative King sends a clear message to the American people. This Congress will not turn a blind eye to his repugnant and racist behavior. Anything short of censure would be shallow. Now, that is one of the 3 formal modes of discipline in the House of Representatives, censure. It lies between reprimand and expulsion. They've only censured 23 members in the history of the Republic. The last was Charlie Rangel in December of 2010. The last formal discipline was meted out to Laura Richardson in 2012. She was a Democrat from California. Now, at the end of the day here's the problem that Republicans have. Look at the makeup of the incoming freshman Republican class. and the incoming freshman Democratic class. There's a lot of diversity, Indian Americans, Native Americans, a lot of white males in the Republican class. This is the issue that Republicans have as they try to reach out to those voters, and if they don't act, there's a problem. Here's something else. Kevin McCarthy the other day was pretty critical of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi after the comments by Rashida Tlaib, the incoming freshman Democrat from Michigan, after she used profane language talking about impeachment and the President of the United States. So if Kevin McCarthy is going to call out Nancy Pelosi for how she's handling Rashida Tlaib, he has to kind of go the other way with Steve King. But whether or not there will be any formal discipline against Steve King remains to be seen. We'll see what happens after that meeting later this afternoon. Dana?
All right, Chad Pergram, thank you.
Thank you.
So both sides are putting their own spin on a pair of recent polls about the government shutdown. The surveys show a majority are more likely to blame the president than Democrats in Congress. Kristen Soltis Anderson is a Republican pollster, Washington Examiner contributor, and author of The Selfie Vote. I'm glad to have you here today. And so public opinion on the wall, do you approve or disapprove, had been very consistent for 2 years, not a lot of movement. We talked about that last week. Within the last half hour, Quinnipiac has just come out with a new poll asking, did the president's speech last week from the Oval Office change your mind about the wall? Only 2% said yes. So people are really locked in. There was some movement in the ABC poll that said that there were more people supporting the wall than before, but not a ton of movement, even after the president used the trappings of the Oval Office.
That's right. We're really at a stalemate here, and a lot of voters are looking at this issue through the lens of how they already view the president. People have very strong feelings about the president, favorable or opposed. If you're favorable to President Trump, this is something he promised. This is something you're going to support, no matter how long this shutdown takes. Right now, 82% of Americans say that they haven't been personally inconvenienced by the shutdown. So if you support the president, you're unlikely to move because suddenly the shutdown's hurting you personally right now. And then those who oppose the wall, there are some folks that may have voted for something like a fence in the past, but they really don't like President Trump. He's so closely associated with the wall, therefore it's tied to him and they don't like it.
So I believe that some Republicans think that the Democrats are painting themselves into a corner, that they're going to become the party that is against border security, and that is going to come back to haunt them. So far, do you see that bearing out?
Not particularly, because Democrats continue to be ahead a little bit when it comes to questions of who are you blaming for the shutdown. They're blaming Trump more than Democrats.
Yeah, I think we have that for the ABC News WashPost poll. 53% of the blame goes to President Trump, 29% to Democrats in Congress, and 13% saying both of them.
However, one number where President Trump does a little bit better than his job approval is on the question of immigration. When they asked voters in that Quinnipiac poll, who do you trust more on immigration? Democrats 49, Trump 44, only a 5-point deficit. Trump is a bit more popular than the wall is. So this idea that, yes, we need to be tougher on border security, an awful lot of voters say yes to that, but is the wall the right approach? That's when you begin to see the support fall a little bit.
What about younger people? You focus on millennials, you know that age group a lot. How do they break down when it comes to this border security issue?
Well, I think for younger people, they tend to be more upbeat about things like, let's use technology to get this right. Let's really assess where are most people coming into the U.S. illegally. If it's through airports, for instance, are there different things we can do with technology at airports to make sure that folks who are coming into this country, if they're supposed to be leaving, we know that they're supposed to be leaving. Can we use sort of more futuristic technology? The president has sort of pushed back on this idea that the wall is medieval. But I think you'd find younger people saying, look, do we have technology that can solve this problem better? And if so, why don't we turn to that instead?
Earlier today at the convention where the president speaking to the American Federation of Farm Bureau, he said that this is all about 2020, that the Democrats think that they can hurt me and my chances for re-election by keeping this shutdown going, by preventing me from fulfilling not just a campaign promise, but he said it's something he believes needs to be done. When it comes to 2020, how much are views shaped now? We have a bunch of Democrats headed to Iowa, so that is underway. But do people really pay attention at this point?
So I am not of the mind that this shutdown is, at this point, likely to affect 2020. Let's think about the last time there was a shutdown. In 2013, Republicans took a beating in the polls for that shutdown. And then the very next month, you had the rollout of healthcare.gov, the Obamacare exchanges. It was a disaster. And that following election in 2014, Republicans did well. The shutdown there evaporated as a political factor. This is a bit of a longer shutdown. It may well become a lot longer of a shutdown. So there's no way to say for sure it won't affect 2020. We've got an awful long way to go.
You mentioned that people are saying that has the shutdown affected me. You have ABC poll saying 38% of people say it's a crisis, 41% say it's a serious problem. You saw some of those TSA lines that people are showing today. That's when it starts to get a little bit more real for people?
I think so. I think the first time you see, a big airport like we had at Houston Airport having to shut down a terminal, more of that. If there's a big outbreak of a foodborne disease that happened, it could have been prevented had there been more food inspectors, something like that. That's when I think you could begin to see public opinion move real fast.
All right, Kristen Soltis-Anderson, it's great to have you here,
Thanks,
especially
Dana.
in studio. Thanks for being here. For sure. So the wife of one American held hostage in Iran now speaking out to Fox News about her husband, a Princeton University graduate student detained in one of Tehran's most notorious prisons for the past 3 years. Senior national security correspondent Jennifer Griffin is live at the Pentagon with more. Jennifer.
Dana, at least 4 Americans are currently being kept by Iranian authorities on what their lawyers, the State Department, and UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention say are trumped-up spying charges. They are pawns in the larger geopolitical conflict between the U.S. and Iran. We traveled to Princeton, New Jersey to speak with the wife and 5-year-old son of one of those American prisoners. Princeton PhD student Zia Wang is a scholar of 19th century Central Asian politics. 3 years ago, he received an academic visa to visit Tehran. His son was 2 years old at the time and now hasn't seen his father in 3 years. Iran says that he's a spy.
Yeah. He is not a spy. He's not a spy. He's just a history nerd. All he wants to do is to do a good research and then teach for the rest of his life.
His wife, Hua, has been fighting for his freedom ever since. Her husband left home the same month the Iran nuclear deal took effect. 5 American prisoners were released as part of the deal. For 20 days, she did not know where he was.
I received a phone call, and it was him crying to me that he was detained. So it was the time that he first came out of solitary confinement and gave me a phone call. And he literally cannot say anything. He just cried to me.
What did he say it was like in prison? How was he treated?
He cannot even properly form a sentence.
Jane Manners was in the same Princeton PhD program with Wang.
He's not a spy. He is a man who is so deeply passionate about history that he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was an American citizen in Iran right after Iran had released nearly all of its U.S. prisoners, and they perhaps needed more.
As a bargaining chip.
As a bargaining chip.
His wife and son hope that he'll be returned soon and that the Iranians will realize they made a mistake. Back to you, Dana.
All right, Jennifer, thank you for that story. So Bernie Sanders adding staff ahead of making a decision on a 2020 run. Next, our panel breaks down the latest additions to the widening field, plus why teachers are walking off the job in the nation's second largest city. A pair of Democrats formally jumping into the 2020 race this weekend. Former HUD Secretary Julian Castro announcing his plan Saturday from his hometown of San Antonio, Texas, as Hawaii Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard also says she has eyes on the White House. I'm joined now by Philip Stutz, a Republican strategist and the author of Fire Them All, and John Summers, former communications director for former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. Good to have you both here. Let me start with you, John. Any excitement around these two announcements, Castro or Tulsi Gabbard, who's under some fire today for previous work she did against the LGBTQ community?
Yeah, I'm not particularly excited about her. You know, if she had her way back in the day when she was doing her work, I'd be in some treatment facility instead of enjoying the family that I've been able to build over the last several years. And so that's a non-starter for me. I think she's going to be a non-starter for a lot of progressives. It's great to hear Julian Castro come out and talk about issues, talking about healthcare, education, issues that people care about, and also equality. So great to hear from him, but even more so, it's exciting to see what's playing out in Texas. As a native Texan, you know, it's exciting to see not only Castro, but then what we're seeing with Beto as well, building these movements that are going to mean something in the state. We'll see what it means in 2020.
If it does, right. I know, Phil, that another one of our Republican strategists that comes on, Colin Reed, has said that Texas is fool's gold for Democrats. But I also wanted to ask you about all of this excitement around the Democrats as they start to figure out who is it going to be, all these people headed to Iowa. Do you think Bernie Sanders will emerge?
Well, he's recruited a ton of talent. I feel like it's a short-term game. I think the talent he's recruited is actually probably following the money. Bernie has a propensity to raise a ton of money. But in the end, and you know this, Dana, we've seen it in politics for years and years, you pretty much get lightning in a bottle once. Not all the time, but most of the time. And you've got a lot of candidates out there. It'll be the biggest field that the Democrats have ever put together. And so who is going to get the lightning in the bottle? I'm not sure it's almost 80-year-old Bernie Sanders this time. It could be Beto. It could be Elizabeth Warren. But there's somebody that will take it. And although Bernie will raise a ton of money, I'm not sure he's going to make it in the long run.
And then what about, John, let me ask you about Joe Biden. There's, obviously people are talking about that. David Leonhardt writes today about how Joe Biden is different from the rest of them, that he should get in there and that he should definitely run. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I've been a big Joe Biden fan for a long, long time. It would thrill me to see him jump into the race. I think he's exactly what we need. But at the end of the day, I hear mixed comments from people who are close to him as to whether he's actually going to run or not. So, yeah.
Well, and while I have you, Philip, I wanted to ask you this. You're from Florida, and there's a story in the New York Times today. Jonathan Martin wrote it, basically saying that the Democrats are worried that Florida is possibly not the swing state that it was. It is actually becoming more of a red state. And if Florida is able to do that and take that off the map for Democrats, I mean, that means the path to getting to the Electoral College is harder for a Democrat in 2020. Why do you think Florida is turning this sort of reddish, more reddish color?
Yeah, the obvious reason is no income tax, and you have candidates out there like Andrew Gillum that was talking about bringing a state income tax into the taxpayers. So they were very much against that. But the one issue I think that has been studied by the Wall Street Journal and a couple others is the school choice issue. This particular election cycle, Republicans really came out for DeSantis and on the school choice issue and targeted African Americans and minority voters. And what we found was that minority voters voted 2/3 more for DeSantis than they did for Donald Trump in 2016, and they doubled the turnout for DeSantis than they did for Rick Scott in the same election. And so I think if Republicans continue to try to build that momentum, especially in the minority communities, that could make the state a pretty big lock for Republicans.
John, I'll give you the last word on Florida.
Yeah, I think Florida's been a red state longer than most of us care to admit, but it's actually, we've seen a big change as a result of the last election when voters passed a ballot initiative reinstating the voting rights of nearly 1.5 million ex-felons. And they know who fought for their right to vote, and they know who fought against their right to vote, and that, of course, being the Republicans, who will take just about any opportunity to silence the voices of the popular vote.
Well, you both live in states where there's going to be a lot of ads coming up in 2020, so that'll be fun to watch. Philip Stutz and John Summers, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Prosecutors revealing for the first time how the suspect accused of kidnapping Jamie Closs and murdering her parents chose her as his victim. His first court appearance just hours away. Fox News Alert, brand new details about the kidnapping of 13-year-old Jamie Closs, as the man accused of kidnapping the girl and killing her parents is due in court for the first time. The criminal complaint revealing how it all began and how he hid her. Matt Finn is live at the courthouse in Barron, Wisconsin. You've been on this story from the beginning. Matt?
Dana, unfathomable details coming from this criminal complaint. First of all, it indicates that the suspect, Jake Patterson, admitted to killing James and Denise Closs and taking their 13-year-old daughter, Jamie. It also expands on the origin of this suspect's obsession with Jamie, saying he saw her one time on her way to school, and that's when he knew he would take her. A portion of the criminal complaint reads, on his drive to the cheese factory on one of his 2 mornings he worked there, he had stopped behind a school bus on U.S. Highway 8 where he watched JLC, Jamie, get on a school bus. The defendant stated he had no idea who she was, nor did he know who lived at the house or how many people lived at that house. The defendant stated when he saw JLC Jamie, he knew that was the girl he was going to take. According to police, Patterson kept Jamie in his house for nearly 3 months and made her hide under his bed when people came over. Patterson stuffed laundry bins with weights against his bed so Jamie would not be seen, the weights making it difficult for her to move them. Jamie says she was deeply afraid to run because the gun was visible at times, and Patterson lashed out at her one time when she moved the bins, hitting her very hard. Police say Patterson went to great lengths to plan the double murder and kidnapping. He wiped down all the shotgun shell casings before using them to erase DNA and shaved his face and head to avoid leaving DNA behind. Police say on October 15, Patterson shot the closet door open with a shotgun, killed James' father, who was trying to protect his family. Patterson then busted into the bathroom where Jamie and her mom were hiding. Patterson shot Jamie's mother in the head in front of the girl, taped Jamie, put her in his trunk, and took her to his rural house where she remained until the brave young girl successfully made a run for it last Thursday. The criminal complaint does not go into any detail about any potential molestation, and the 911 call from the Kloss home, that recording is expected to be released in just a few hours. Dana.
Shocking. All right, Matt Finn, thank you. And now a look at other stories you should know about. It's our Daily 3. 32,000 teachers walking off the job in Los Angeles today after failing to reach an agreement on a new contract. Class size, the biggest sticking point in negotiations. Class is still on for the city's 600,000 students. And a federal judge blocking the Trump administration from enacting rules that would allow employers in 13 states to decline to offer free birth control. Previously, only religious groups were able to opt out of contraceptive coverage. And a severe winter storm is being blamed for deaths in several states. Nearly a foot of snow fell on St. Louis as part of a storm that reached all the way to the eastern seaboard. Coming up tonight on The 5, Greg Gutfeld's got a driving test tomorrow, so we're helping him study with a practice test today. I'll quiz the rest of the 5 on their driving knowledge. I'm really looking forward to this. I'm also hoping that I can get a few answers right myself. Since moving to New York, I haven't driven as much either. All right, thanks for joining us, everyone, here on the Daily Briefing. We'll see you all week. I'm Dana Perino. Here's Shep.
It's noon on the West Coast, 3 o'clock at the White House, where the president says he never worked for Russia after back-to-back bombshell reports about the American president and Vladimir Putin. Now Democrats are demanding to hear from an interpreter who was in the room with the two leaders. And the longest-running government shutdown in American history is now in week 4. We'll get the latest on the standoff as major airports close down security checkpoints. Reporting begins now.
Now, Shepard Smith reporting live from the Fox News deck.
And good Monday afternoon. The President of the United States says he never worked for Russia. An extraordinary statement from an American president. The denial comes after reports in the New York Times and in the Washington Post. The Times reports the FBI actually investigated whether President Trump was secretly working